Okay, most people are familiar with paper bark birch. They're familiar with it because it grows in boreal type forests. It is very saturated with oils, resinous type materials that will start fires really well, but not a lot of people are familiar with the red birch or the river birch that we have in Utah. So knowing that it exists, what it looks like, and also knowing that you can start a fire with it similar to the way that you start fires with paper bark birch is super important. So let's try this out. All right, so there's a river birch tree over here, or a red birch tree we're gonna look at. In addition to the telltale sign of the eye that you see on the bark, this is what the leaf looks like. I think it's very similar to serviceberry bush, only smaller, jagged edges. That's how my brain works on this. So, there's a nice close-up of what the leaf looks like. And if you can remember this jagged edge leaf shape in conjunction with the eyeballs that you see on the bark, that'll help you identify birch trees in general. So if we look right here on the bark, this is a chunk of bark that's fallen off. Here's all those little eyes. As the tree starts to get bigger, the knots also look like little eyes, a little dash mark all over the place. And then this right here is that very highly resinous and full of fat bark that you can use to scrape and make your fire with. Okay guys, so first thing we need to do is identify it. Almost all birch can be identified by what I call an eye knot. I'm not the one that came up with it, but that's the way I remember it. So an eye knot, essentially on this one, looks like these little eyeballs that you'll see on here, okay? Usually, when you have these eye knots, it looks like little slanted eyes that are looking at you. That's one indicator of birch. The other thing that indicates birch is its bark has a tendency to roll like paper. Okay, the paper bark birch, it does this substantially. It'll look more like this on the outside. And one good thing with birch is the fact that you can, if I get the spider web off, you can take the outer layers of this bark without really hurting the tree. So if I want to take this dead stuff right here, or even this stuff right here, it's not really going to affect the tree. It's already something that's kind of on its way out. Paper bark birch is much more substantially, it will fall apart more, but this river birch does the same thing. The other thing too is if you are going to take it off of a dead section, just cut off like half or part of that section. Don't wring the entire tree or that limb's dead. If you've got a dead branch, it's irrelevant. But if you're getting to live anything, just don't do that or you're going to kill the tree. Now, if I want to take this piece here, essentially what I'm going to do is just cut straight down there, cut right here, if I can see. Cut right over the top of it. If it's deep enough, it'll peel. I don't think this side's quite deep enough. And this is kind of a dead chunk, so it's probably going to split more than peel. But once you've got that, you'll see that you can get these layers off here, and this is what you're going to use for your fire starting. All right, so I'm going to gather a bigger piece. We'll take you to another location, and I'll show you how to get flame with something simple like a ferro rod by using the river birch bark. All right, now that I've gathered some of the river birch, what I'm going to do is just with the ferro rod, and I'm using this as an example because I know the majority of people have this. If you can do friction fire, you just use this as your tinder. If you can do flint and steel with char cloth or tinder fungus, you just add this to your and treat it like nesting material essentially. But one thing you can do with this that is really hard to do with nesting material is to get a flame straight off of the bark itself. So with just a little bit of preparation, I'm essentially going to scrape up a little of the bark and loosen it into a pile. And if you look at this, it's making little micro shavings. What's going to happen is these little micro shavings have a lot more surface area, and they are going to handle taking a spark much easier. You can do this with flint and steel. It's very hard. It's much easier with the ferro rod because it's a much higher temperatured spark than with flint and steel. So if you're in ideal dry conditions and you want to do it with flint and steel, go for it. Otherwise, if you've got your ferro rod, that's the way to make it happen. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to kind of set this on the side of the rock here, and we're right next to a river so that I can get rid of this once I've created it. I like to prep it if you can, put a little teeth marks inside of your ferro rod, and that gives it the ability to really grip and pull chunks off. Because what you're doing here is scraping chunks of your ferro rod off, and they mix with oxygen. That's how they ignite and then drop there. Okay, let's talk about the proper way to do this. You don't throw your sparks at it. You don't try to do this by making your blade hit your nest. You just put it down, and I will hold the powder down with my ferro rod, and then I'll use a pumping action with my knife in order to get my spark. Got a couple of embers there. Actually got a little bit of flame. Once we've got that flame, once it blows out, you just transfer it over. Okay, so let's try this again real quick. And that's a good example to show that nothing's ideal. If you get it and it fails, you just do it again. I still kind of have an ember in there. You can see we've got embers but not flame. I could drop that in nesting material and get fire that way, or we can just keep pumping this until we get actual flame. Might just do this the ember way. So as an example, if it doesn't go straight to flame, we've got a good ember there, and I've got some nesting material on me. Either we can scratch this off and redo it again, or I can grab some of this nesting material out of my bag, which is just juniper bark. Okay, there's flame in there. This is one way to do this. It's not the way that I intended, but because I grabbed some juniper bark earlier today and threw it in my bag, it gave me the option. So do understand that there's two ways you can do this. So let me put this in the river. There's two ways that you can do this. One is to build up a really large pile of material and then scrape on it until you actually have flame. The other is to take a coal, transfer it to a nest until you get flame. Both ways work. I was struggling with this a little bit in getting the flame to start. You saw the flame on the first one, but I didn't transfer any nesting, any tinder level material over to it fast enough, so I started over. Failed again, added the nest to it. I want these videos to be realistic, so I'm going to show you these techniques in the field, what I would actually do. Now, if I didn't have that nesting material, essentially I would scrape more off. I could use all sorts of other materials in the environment, from cotton from a cottonwood tree to cattail fluff, and get a little bit of a flash or flash tinder, then turn that into flame. But if I didn't have that nesting material, I'd scrape this again and see if I can get flame. So I'm gonna try this one more time. So I'm gonna tuck this in this little spot here and go full bore on it. So I'm going to move my nesting material closer to these curls, see if it will grab it. Push the hole through it. Yeah, it's just pushing the hole through it. Here we go. Make sure I'm not hitting any rocks. That's not cool. Ready? Let's get this guy to work. Here we go. There we go. So that shows how you can do this with just the fuzz of the bark. You can see this black that's coming out of there. That's oil. That's what makes this bark so important to use, is all that black. Essentially what I did is I used the edge of the knife to scrape little shavings of the bark into a pile. I lit it up by sliding my knife to blow a bunch of sparks in there. Also, I held my ferro down and pumped the sparks into it instead of trying to throw sparks at it. That's a major, major key. That is, when I learned that, it changed the way that I did ferro rods from then on forward. Once I got a little flame on this dust pile, I give it the edge of this other chunk of birch bark right there. And as you can see, it takes like a candle. There's so much fat in this wood that it just holds. So if you're having fire starting problems, add this as tinder. If you're going from spark to flame, use the fluff. Then once you've got the flame, ignite the bark, and you'll be able to radically change how you make fire, all with a ferro rod. All right, guys, hopefully this is valuable to you. If it was, hit the subscribe button. If you got any questions, leave them down below. Always put your fire out in the river. And thank you for watching. That one gets to go in the river too.